An amygdala hijack. I gotta show you this. All right, check this out. This is a PDF that I came across on the web, and I'll give a link to it in the video. But check out what an amygdala hijack is. The amygdala is the fight or flight of the emotional memory part of your brain. Its job is to protect by comparing incoming data with emotional memories. An amygdala hijacking occurs when we respond out of measure with the actual threat because it has triggered a much more significant emotional response, or much more significant emotional threat. For instance, the amygdala will react similarly to the threat of being eaten by a tiger, physical threat, and the threat of an ego attack, emotional threat, by bringing on the fight or flight mechanism. All right, I've been explaining this. I've been talking about the amygdala and the neocortex and that sort of thing. And what is happening in your life here, people, is you are being hijacked by this stupid part of your brain, the amygdala, all right? So check it out. When one experiences an amygdala hijacking, the amygdala overtakes the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain, and there's little or no ability to rely on intelligence or reasoning. The immediate result of a hijack is a decrease in working memory. Adrenaline is released and will be present and effective for 18 minutes. Check this out. Hormones are released into the bloodstream and will take 3 to 4 hours to clear. You get this anxiety, and it's going to take you 3 or 4 hours to get it out of your system. During the hijack, the number of perspectives accessible decreases. Instead of 4 possible solutions, the observer will see 3, and then 2, and then only 1. And when only one choice remains, the hijack is complete, and the observer returns to a default habitual behavior. You just habituate, and that's what is happening here. Now, in this PDF, they gave us some interesting ideas of how to stop this amygdala hijacking. Check this out, okay? A model to interrupt the amygdala hijacking. Stop. Physical withdrawal. If possible, name the trigger or emotion. If impossible from a physical withdrawal, at least name the trigger or emotion. Keeps the neocortex engaged and active and helps to prevent the amygdala from taking over. So just name what's going on. Just get it out of the out of the amygdala and get it back into the neocortex. Oxygenate, taking deep breaths with intention and purpose. Pay attention to breath. Keeps the neocortex engaged. So by breathing, you're getting oxygen back into the neocortex, because remember, the amygdala is taking all the energy. It's taking everything. It's shutting everything down, because remember, you're being eaten by a tiger. Wouldn't you want that? If you're being about to be devoured by a tiger, wouldn't you like a part of your brain to just take care of everything? But I'll tell you what, your boss is not a tiger. You losing your job is not a tiger. You not being able to pay your bills is not a tiger. You're going to live through all of that. You're going to live through it all. So you can't be down in that amygdala. You got to be up in the neocortex. You got to be in the neocortex so that you can think rationally, so you have multiple solutions, as opposed to fight or flight. What am I going to do? My wife tells me every time that she gets worried, all she wants to do is run away. She wants to quit and run away. That's her instinct. And I definitely know that feeling. Oftentimes I feel that way, but then I'm ready to go and attack it. Attack that tiger. Everybody reacts differently to those things. But both are wrong. When you can't pay your bills, you don't want to run away and you don't want to fight it. You can't kill a bill. It's impossible. You have to think about what you're going to do with the bill. You need to make lists. You need to organize your life. You need to relax. You need to chill out so that all of the rationality of your neocortex can take hold, and that you can use your human brain to solve your problems, not your reptilian amygdala brain. Because it'll just tell you to run away, hide in a closet or something. It's not going to solve your problems. It's not going to solve your problems. A couple different solutions too. Strength and appreciation. It's difficult to get hijacked while focusing on appreciation, particularly if you can appreciate the source of the hijack, the person who said whatever or caused the hijack. So thinking positively, appreciating the amazingness, or just thinking about other things in your life that you appreciate. Do you know that petting a furry animal releases, it gives you renewal type of energy? Thinking about a 4 or 5-year-old child gives you renewal energy. going to church with a loving God, incidentally, not a fear involving God. A loving God gives you renewal, exercise, sleep. These things give you renewal. And then finally, they suggest survey the landscape. Take the time to revisit the hijack experience after it's completed to learn more about what happened and why. Work to identify the trigger to better manage emotion or interrupt the hijack early. So this is what I want you to do. Next time you're getting hijacked and you're feeling all fighty or flighty, I want you to write down all those feelings. I don't want you to solve it right now. I don't want you to solve it. I just want you to write down everything that you feel. Like, oh, this happened and this is how I felt. Like, they made me so mad, I wanted to kill them, I wanted to just quit, I wanted to give up, and write it, get it as thorough as you possibly can. And then, when you feel stronger, when all that's chilled out in a day or 3 to 4 hours at least, come back when you feel confident and address every one of those concerns. Say, all right, this is how I really should have handled it, or, you know, this is how it really played out. The next time this happens, this is what I'm going to do. Okay? And then, when you get hijacked again, then you can pull out this list. I'm not going to say it's going to solve your problems, but it is going to start interjecting some unusual behaviors that you normally don't do. It'll start to get you back into that neocortex a little bit, because you'll look at it a little bit more rationally. It takes practice. But I'm here to tell you something. You have nothing to fear. There's nothing on your plate to be afraid of. As long as you're not being attacked by a tiger, you are going to be okay. So get out of that amygdala. Get up in the neocortex. Think rationally. You can do it. That is what your human brain wants you to do.
And I'm not claiming to know that, but I think you would be using the same methodology I was telling you about. So let's look at the neural basis of emotional intelligence versus IQ, just to give you a sense of why this matters. If you humor me, this is like a side view of the brain. Just go along with that, okay? The brain evolved from the bottom up in evolution. And the brain is basically an elegant machine for survival and has been shaped by what works in survival. It turned out that among mammals, once we got to mammals, you needed to have a brain that registered emotions, because emotions have, in evolution, the primary survival function. There's one structure in the midbrain that's called the amygdala, which is the brain's sentinel, has a privileged position in perception. Everything we see in every moment goes mostly to the sensory cortex, but a small part of it goes to the amygdala. Not to other structures, but to the amygdala, which scans it to see, is this a threat? That's a constant question in evolution. Is this a threat? Or more generally, the amygdala has presumably been the structure that answers the one critical question for survival: do I eat it or does it eat me? This is not a question you want to go Google. Because in evolution, if you do, it just ate you. And so you didn't pass on this design of brain to us. The amygdala is a hair trigger. In other words, it would rather be safe than sorry. It gets a very fuzzy picture of what's going on. But if it thinks it has a match, it has the ability to trigger what's called the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This creates a rush of stress hormones. It changes the entire way the brain prioritizes information. Once this axis has been triggered, it means that, for example, if the emotion is fear, everything relevant to what's scaring us is what preoccupies attention. It captures attention. It changes the hierarchy within memory so that we remember and think about only what pertains to the thing that's scaring us at the moment. And it does all the other things of the classic stress response. It sends energy to the limbs so we can run or fight and flee or freeze, whatever. So it's the classic fight, flight, freeze trigger. The problem is that the amygdala functions today the way it always has, and we don't operate in a world now that has actual physical threats. We operate in a complex symbolic reality where what we face are complex symbolic threats. He's not treating me fairly. She's dissing me. Whatever it may be, these threats today trigger the HPA axis, the amygdala. And so when we are caught in the grip of a distressing emotion, it means that attention narrows and fixates, and we get into a state which is suboptimal for most of life in ways I'll unpack for you. Now, one of the things that the amygdala does is create, when it really thinks something's urgent, create what's called an amygdala hijack, the signs of which are 3. You have a very strong emotional response. It's very sudden and intense, and you do something or say something or send an email that when the dust settles you really regret, right? That is a sign of an amygdala hijack. And it happens to really intelligent people because we get really dumb when the amygdala takes us over. Because we're being run by our fears and our anger, by emotional repertoires that were learned unconsciously in childhood. We become very childlike. Now the good news is, when we have an impulse from the amygdala, that goes up to an area just behind the forehead, which is the prefrontal cortex. How did that happen? Did you do that? It's okay. No problem. Sorry.
He's not in trouble.
You know the guy. So the prefrontal cortex is very important. It's the brain's executive center. The PFC draws together information from all over the brain. So when you're having amygdala hijack, like, this guy's not treating me right, I'm so pissed off I could slug him. I'm sure it never happens here, but just hypothetically, if you ever did. That impulse goes up to the executive center, and it scans all other incoming information. It kind of Googles the brain very quickly, and it comes up with that crucial fact you need to know now, like, oh, but this is your boss. Okay. Oh. Well, so I'm not going to slug him, I'm going to smile and change the subject. And that is exactly the difference between purely cortical abilities, which operate solely in the top of the brain, the neocortex, that's where the IQ resides, and emotional intelligence abilities, which integrate the executive center and the emotional centers, because it's not just the amygdala, it's an extended network through the hippocampus and other elements. The amygdala is very widely connected throughout the brain. So when I talk about emotional intelligence at the neural level, I'm talking about this neocortical, actually prefrontal, subcortical integration of abilities. Now, there are 4 parts to emotional intelligence. There are 4 different domains. The first 2, oh, I forgot something really important. Prefrontal cortex. While I'm on the subject, it turns out that when the amygdala hijacks, it drives and takes over the right side of the prefrontal cortex. If you do a brain imaging, when someone's having a hijack, someone's really scared or angry, you see a lot of activity in the amygdala and related circuits, and a lot of activity on the right. When we're feeling good, we're having a great day, we're good energy, I could take on anything, I'm very enthusiastic and so on, you see a very different picture in the prefrontal cortex. The right is quiet and the left is highly active. Each of us, it's been discovered by a fellow named Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin, each of us has a resting ratio of right to left activation that predicts quite accurately our mood range day to day. There's a bell curve for it. Most of us are in the middle. We have good days, we have bad days. If you're very far to the right, it means that you're probably clinically depressed or have an anxiety disorder. If you're very far to the left, things just roll off you. You hardly ever have a bad day. And what the left does, that the right does not do, is have an inhibitory circuit for the amygdala. So the amygdala sends out these thoughts that could become what are called depressogenic thoughts, something really upsetting, or that could provoke anxiety or make you really angry. And the left prefrontal cortex basically says, shut up. I don't need to hear that now. And it calms the amygdala. So people who have this ability have more good days, more high energy, more self-confidence, more enthusiasm, and better moods.
I think it's a distraction because, I mean, it's true in the sense that the hippocampus is necessary to have a conscious recollection of some past event. And the amygdala participates in unconscious memory, but we shouldn't really taint it with the Freudian concepts because that adds a lot of baggage. The amygdala is an unconscious processor because it's just not connected with the conscious system. It's kind of like, by default unconscious, as opposed to being, in the Freudian sense of unconscious, something that was conscious but was too anxiety-provoking and therefore shipped to the unconscious. The amygdala gets direct sensory information, and it learns and stores information on its own, and that information that's stored then controls emotional responses. The connectivity is hardwired. So one way to think about it is that a rat will respond to a cat without any learning by freezing, raising its blood pressure and heart rate and respiration and releasing stress hormones. But it will also respond to a stimulus associated with the cat and have the same responses. So you don't learn how to be afraid. Your amygdala doesn't have to learn what to do. It learns what to do it in response to. So it learns what stimuli it should respond to. So it's learning and memory in that sense that we call an implicit kind of memory, where you don't have to have any conscious involvement. Whereas the hippocampus is necessary to have a conscious memory. So yes, they do participate in conscious and unconscious memories, but not in the Freudian sense. But there's a whole other side of the amygdala's role in memory, which is that when the amygdala is activated and all those hormones and other things happen, they get released, that provides information that feeds back to parts of the brain like the hippocampus and allows them to store their memories in a much more efficient and strong way. So we know that emotional memories are stored more vividly than other kinds of memories. It used to be thought that they're more accurate, but in fact now we know they're not more accurate. They're just sort of more vivid and strong in the personal sense, but they can be highly inaccurate. This is shown by studies of natural disasters and so forth. Well, not always so natural, but like the Space Challenger, the shuttle. Space Shuttle Challenger explosion. A lot of people witnessed that, and they were studied almost immediately by psychologists who made notes of exactly what their responses, what they were experiencing at the time. And then a year later, they were surveyed again, and the responses were completely different from what they remembered originally, and then several years later, it completely changed again. So what we remember is not necessarily what we experienced originally. So the accuracy of those memories changes over time, but their strength in terms of your subjective feeling that it was a really powerful experience is there. Well, the amygdala is a small region of the brain. It's in what's called the temporal lobe of the brain. If we divide the cerebral hemispheres into the four major lobes, occipital, temporal, parietal, and frontal, it's in the temporal lobe, which is under the temporal bone, which is behind your ear. And the amygdala would be located at a point where a line that goes through your eye and through your ear intersect in your brain. So imagine like someone has shot an arrow through to your eye, and another one into your ear. Where those two come together would be roughly where it is, and on both sides of the brain, of course, because most structures, in fact, all structures are bilateral in that sense. So it's, it's sometimes referred to as an almond or an almond-shaped structure, which is a bit of a misnomer because there's one part of it that's almond-shaped, and that caught the attention of early anatomists, and so they named this almond-shaped structure the amygdala. But as the amygdala began to be defined more broadly, it includes a lot of structures other than that little almond-shaped piece. It's most commonly associated with fear, although that's not its only function. It's its most heavily studied function, and the reason for that is that it's much easier to study fear than other emotions. Things that are bad have more weight than things that are good, in a sense. I mean, you can put off eating, drinking, sex, whatever for an indefinite amount of time, but you have to respond to danger immediately. You don't find great novels about happy subjects. It's always about, the bad stuff. And it's sometimes said that there's this negative bias in emotion, which is that most research on emotion is about the negative stuff, but the fact is that the negative stuff turns out to be the most important for survival, in a sense, in terms of immediacy and having to respond to it. So some of the key interconnections of the amygdala, and these connections actually define what it does, in a sense, at least with respect to fear. The amygdala gets sensory information directly from the various sensory systems that process the external world. So the visual system, the auditory system, olfactory, touch, pain, and so forth. All of these kind of come together or converge in the amygdala. And then the amygdala connects on the output side with all the systems involved in emotional reactivity. So when you encounter sudden danger, you might freeze. Your blood pressure and heart rate begin to rise, stress hormones are released. All these things happen as a result of outputs of the amygdala. So the amygdala you can think of as kind of this, this circle with one input coming in being the input coming in being a sensory flow of sensory information from the external world, and then outputs being connections to systems involved in controlling the responses. So, but we have to expand those inputs, so it's getting not just one sensory input, but all sensory inputs. So each sensory system is coming in. And it doesn't stop there, because in addition to getting information from sensory systems, it also gets information from higher order systems like the prefrontal cortex and higher order association areas involved in various kinds of integrative activities in the cortex. What it does is a function of what connections it has. So because it has connections with all these sensory systems, it can take in information from the environment of a variety of types and use that information. And so if a sound in the external world occurs right before something painful happens, you associate that sound with the painful event, and that sound will then later trigger a protective defense response. But if the sound occurs just before food, when you're hungry, then the sound will be associated with that kind of a positive or repetitive event. And so what the amygdala is doing is forming associations between random or neutral external stimuli and the kinds of reinforcing events that will stamp in those experiences in a stronger way. So it's creating these what's called Pavlovian associations, stimulus 1 plus stimulus 2. If one of those is in a biologically significant stimulus, then the other one will acquire some kind of biological significance itself, whether it's positive or negative. Now that information can then be used, and this is sort of what I think you were referring to in terms of adaptive behavior. So that CS-US relationship, or say sound-food relationship, can then be used to guide instrumental behavior, which is goal-directed behavior. So if in the past you've obtained food at a certain location, the stimuli that are proximal to that location serve as conditioned stimuli and are reinforcing to you because they're close to the actual goal, and they take you towards the goal. Same thing happens with aversive stimuli. It's just that it works in the opposite way.